In this lesson, we're going to look at the properties of operations to multiply and divide rational numbers. The objective today, I will demonstrate my mathematical ability to utilize properties of operations to multiply and divide rational numbers without the use of a calculator through class discussion. This is very similar to that lesson that we had a couple weeks ago about the properties of addition and subtraction. We're going to look at pretty much the same thing with multiplication and division. Okay, the toolbox words you need to make sure you add is the associative property of multiplication, the commutative property of multiplication, and then the distributive property. Remember, the associative property we're going to look at is I can rearrange the grouping of numbers. That's exactly like the associative property of addition, but I'm using it with multiplication. And the same thing with the commutative property of multiplication. I can change the order of the numbers, and I don't change the answer at all. And that is the commutative property of multiplication. Now, we really haven't talked about the distributive property a whole lot, so let's go ahead and let's look at that real quick. Okay, so with the distributive property, I have a number usually. With the distributive property, I usually have something outside my parentheses. And all I'm going to do with this number outside is I'm going to distribute it to everything on the inside. Okay? So I multiply it times this first term and times this second term. Well, let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to take this and proper those. So 5 times 3 is 15 plus 1 is 16. So I'm going to come over here and go negative 6 times 16 over 3. Okay, put that over 1. I'm going to cross reduce if I can, and yes, I can. So I'm going to cross reduce that. That is a 1, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. Negative 6 divided by 3 is a negative 2. Okay, so now I have a negative 2 times 16, which is going to be 32. Okay, so it's going to be a negative 32. So I bring that back over here. I have a negative 32 plus negative 6 times negative 4, a negative times a negative 6 times positive 4, a negative times a positive. It's going to be a negative. So my answer is 6 times 4 is 24. Okay. And now I can simply add negative 32 plus negative 24 is going to be a negative 56. Because when I add a negative plus a negative is a negative. Alright, so that's the distributive property. Basically, the number outside, or the term outside, is going to be multiplied by everything on the inside. I'm distributing it to the 5 1/3. I'm distributing it also to the 4. Alright, let's look at another problem. Now I have a problem like this. It looks rather confusing. Okay, there's a lot to it. But guess what I can use? I can use the commutative property, and I can change the order. So I'm going to have 4 times a negative 8 times 9, okay, times 1/3 times a negative 1/2. Now, I could also change the grouping here. I can go multiply this, and the reason I would do that is because I know that 3 is a factor of 9, and I'm not going to have a lot of fractions left over. That's one way. Now remember, there are multiple ways to do this. Alright? I could also, so let's try that for a minute. So I have 4 times a negative 8 times 9 times 1/3, okay, is just 3, times a negative 1/2. Alright, now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move this 1/2 to where I can get rid of it pretty easily. I can do that either with the 4 or the 8. Doesn't really matter, so let's take it with the 8. So I'm going to rearrange things. So I'm going to have 4 times a negative 8 times a negative 1/2. There, I changed the grouping again, times 3. Okay, negative 8 times 1/2 is 4, because the negative times the negative is a positive, and 8 times 1/2 is 4. So then I have 4 times 4 times 3. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 3 is going to be 48. Now, this isn't the only way I could do this problem. There's a couple different ways I could have done it. It's just how I chose to do it this time. So in this problem, I'm going to look at the distributive property again. However, I'm going to change the grouping and how I'm looking at things. Alright? So I'm going to rearrange this because I have 16 times a negative 3/8 plus a 16 times 1/4. Well, I could go 16 times a negative 3/8 plus 1/4. Because look at this, if I put parentheses around this 1/4, okay, I'm still adding, I'm still going 16 times negative 3/8, that's what I'm doing here, plus I'm going 16 times 1/4. I'm going backwards into what I'm doing. That's all I'm doing here. Now, let's see if we can get this in equivalent fractions. Because I'm trying to add, I need to have a common denominator. So, a common denominator here is going to be 8. So what I do to 4 to get me to 8, I multiply by 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. Plus a negative 3/8, okay, times 16. Now, a negative 3/8 plus a positive 2/8, well, if I look at numerators, negative 3 plus positive 2. The signs are different, so I must subtract. 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay? And then the sign goes to that of the larger number, or the larger absolute value. Negative 3 has a large absolute value. It is farther from 0 on the number line, so therefore this is negative. So now I have 16 times a negative 1/8, or 16 over 1 times a negative 1/8. Now I'm going to cross reduce. Now, what is the greatest common factor of 8 and 16? Well, that would be 8. 8 divided by 8 is 1. 16 divided by 8 is 2. Now, I simply multiply. 2 times a negative 1 is a negative 2. Because remember, a positive times a negative is a negative. I have one negative sign, which is an odd number. So the answer to this problem would be simply negative 2. Now, I could have gone through and multiplied 16 times a negative 3/8 and then added that to 16 times 1/4. If I would have done that, I would have gotten this exact same answer. Alright? I'm just showing you a different way in which we can use the properties to help us. Okay, again, looking at this problem, there's multiple ways we can do it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get it all in the same operations. I'm going to go through and do all my division. Well, remember, when I'm dividing by a fraction, I'm going to actually multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, so I have 1 times 3/2, which is just 3/2, times a negative 8, times 3. There again, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/2 is a negative 2. I could write this negative 2 over 1 if I wanted to. I'm choosing not to at this moment. Okay. Now, I have negative 1 times 3/2, which is simply 3/2. Okay. Times a negative 8 times 3 times a negative 2. I'm going to use my commutative property here. I'm going to change the order. So I'm going to go negative 2 times 3/2 times a negative 8 times 3. Why did I do that? Well, I can see here I could cross reduce and I could get these 2's so they are reduced. So 2 divided by, the greatest common factor of 2 and 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And 2 divided by 2 is 1, so I'm left with a negative 1. Negative 1 times 3 is simply a negative 3 times a negative 8 times 3. I could rearrange this one more time. I could go negative 3 times 3 times a negative 8. Okay. Negative 3 times negative 3 is going to be, or times a positive 3 rather, it's going to be a negative 9. Negative 9 times a negative 8 is going to end up being a positive 72. Okay. I rearranged this a couple different times, and I was able to do that through the use of the properties. Okay, remember that we have three of them now. We have the associative property where I changed the order, or changed the grouping. I have the commutative property where I changed the order. I did that here, and I did that here. Alright. I have the distributive property where the number outside the parentheses, I'm going to distribute to everything on the inside of the parentheses. Alright, make sure you have all those down and have your WSQ filled out, and I'll see you in class.